Picture this: a woman standing in her driveway, covered in grease and rust, staring at a crumbling piece of history that everyone called a money pit, a 1930 fire truck that hadn't run in decades. Her savings account drained, her friends shaking their heads, her family questioning her sanity. They all said the same thing: you're throwing your money away on junk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what if I told you that this so-called junk, this rusted relic from nearly a century ago, would one day become the difference between life and death for an entire community? What if that fire truck, the one everyone mocked, would end up putting out the biggest fire anyone had ever seen? This is the story of courage, persistence, and how sometimes the things the world dismisses as worthless turn out to be exactly what we need most. The autumn wind swept through Millbrook County, carrying with it the scent of dried leaves and the distant promise of winter. In a small workshop on the outskirts of Harrisville, a town barely visible on most maps, worked a woman named Claire Donovan. She wasn't famous. She didn't come from money. She was just an ordinary mechanic trying to make ends meet in a world that seemed to get harder every single day. Claire ran Donovan's Auto Repair, a modest garage she'd inherited from her father 5 years earlier. The building was old, the paint peeling in long strips down the wooden siding, but it was hers. Every morning, she'd unlock the heavy garage doors, fire up the space heater that barely took the chill off, and get to work on whatever vehicles the townspeople brought her way. Brake jobs, oil changes, the occasional engine overhaul. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. Her hands were perpetually stained with motor oil, her fingernails chipped and blackened, despite her best efforts to scrub them clean. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, practical and out of the way. At 38 years old, Claire had the kind of weathered beauty that came from years of hard physical labor and worry. Laugh lines creased the corners of her eyes, but lately those lines seemed deeper, carved by stress rather than joy. The truth was, Claire was drowning. Her mother, Patricia, lived in the nursing facility across town, suffering from advancing Alzheimer's disease. The costs were astronomical. Even with insurance, the monthly bills climbed higher and higher, a mountain of debt that seemed impossible to scale. Claire visited every Sunday without fail, sitting beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, talking about the garage, about the weather, about nothing and everything. Sometimes her mother recognized her. Most times she didn't. Those were the hardest visits. Then there was her nephew, Marcus. He was 16 now, living with Claire ever since her sister vanished 3 years ago. Nobody knew where Jessica had gone. One day she was there, struggling with her own demons, and the next she was simply gone. Marcus was 13 then, angry and confused, and Claire had stepped up without hesitation. She became her guardian, her provider, the closest thing to a parent he had left. Marcus was a good kid despite everything, smart as a whip, with a natural talent for mechanics and engineering. He spent hours in the garage with Claire, learning, tinkering, asking questions that made her think. But he had dreams bigger than Harrisville. He wanted to go to college, to study mechanical engineering at a real university. Claire wanted that for him too, more than anything. But college cost money, a lot of money. Money she simply didn't have. Every night, Claire sat at her small kitchen table surrounded by bills, medical expenses, utilities, property taxes on the garage, Marcus's school supplies, groceries. The numbers never added up right. She'd move money from one envelope to another, rob Peter to pay Paul, as her father used to say. She'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, doing math in her head, trying to figure out how to stretch every dollar just a little bit further. The garage was struggling too. Harrisville was dying slowly, the way small towns do. Young people moved away seeking opportunities, businesses closed, the population shrank year after year. Claire's customer base was dwindling. Some weeks, she barely made enough to keep the lights on. She'd considered selling the place, but who would buy it? And even if someone did, where would she go? What would she do? This garage was all she had, all she knew. Her friends meant well, but they didn't understand. Her best friend since high school, Denise Parker, worked at the county clerk's office and constantly suggested Claire should just find a better job or move somewhere with more opportunities, as if it was that simple, as if Claire could just abandon her mother, uproot Marcus from the only stability he'd known, and start over somewhere else with nothing. There were nights when the weight of it all felt crushing. Claire would stand in the garage long after closing, wiping down tools she'd already cleaned just to avoid going home to that pile of bills. She'd look around at the familiar space, at her father's old tools still hanging on the pegboard, at the faded photographs of classic cars he'd restored over the years, and she'd feel the sting of tears she refused to let fall. She wasn't a quitter. The Donovan family didn't quit. Her father had taught her that. He'd built this business from nothing, working 16-hour days, earning a reputation for quality work and honest dealing. When the cancer took him 5 years ago, Claire had promised him she'd keep it going. She'd keep the Donovan name alive in Harrisville. But keeping that promise was getting harder every day. It was on a Thursday afternoon in late October when everything changed. Claire was under a Ford pickup, replacing a worn-out exhaust system, when she heard the rumble of a large truck pulling into her lot. She rolled out from under the vehicle, wiping her hands on an already filthy rag, and walked outside. An old flatbed tow truck sat in her driveway, and on the back of it was something that made her heart skip a beat. A fire truck. Not just any fire truck, but a 1930 American LaFrance Type 145 pumper. Claire recognized it immediately. This was a piece of history, a genuine antique fire apparatus from the golden age of firefighting equipment. The truck was a disaster. Rust covered every surface. The once bright red paint had faded to a dull, patchy orange-brown. The chrome was pitted and corroded. The tires were rotted, the hoses were cracked and brittle, and the brass fittings were tarnished black. It looked like it had been sitting in a field for decades, which, as it turned out, it had been. The tow truck driver climbed down, a grizzled man named Frank Hutchins who occasionally brought her business. "Afternoon, Claire," he said, tipping his cap. "Got something interesting for you." Claire walked slowly around the fire truck, her experienced eye taking in every detail. Despite the decades of neglect and decay, she could see the bones of something magnificent. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. These old LaFrance trucks were hand-built, each one a work of art as much as a working vehicle. "Where did this come from?" she asked, running her hand along the corroded side panel. "Old Garrett Farm out past Riverside," Frank explained. "Been sitting in their back 40 for God knows how long. Family's selling off the property, cleaning everything out. They were going to scrap it, but I remembered you had a thing for old trucks. Thought maybe you'd want first crack at it." Claire's mind was racing. A vehicle like this, properly restored, could be worth serious money. There were collectors all over the country who'd paid top dollar for a fully restored 1930s fire truck. She'd seen similar models sell at auction for $50,000, $60,000, even $70,000. Money that could pay for her mother's care. Money that could send Marcus to college. Money that could save her garage. But restoration would be expensive, time-consuming. She'd need parts, many of which would have to be custom fabricated. She'd need materials. The engine alone would require a complete rebuild. And there was no guarantee. She could pour thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours into this project and end up with something that still wouldn't run, or wouldn't pass inspection, or wouldn't find a buyer. "How much do they want for it?" Claire heard herself ask. Frank shrugged. "They said make an offer. Like I said, they were just going to scrap it. Whatever you offer is probably more than they'd get in scrap metal." Claire did some quick mental math. She had about $3,000 in her savings account, money she'd been setting aside for emergencies, for the inevitable catastrophe that always seemed just around the corner. This fire truck could be an investment, or it could be the biggest mistake of her life. "I'll give him $1,500, Claire said, her voice steady, despite the hammering of her heart. Frank nodded. "I'll make the call." 20 minutes later, the deal was done. The fire truck was hers. Frank helped her unload it into the empty bay in her garage, the one she usually kept clear for larger projects. As the old LaFrance settled onto the concrete floor with a groan of ancient springs, Claire stood back and looked at what she'd just bought. It was a wreck, an absolute disaster, and it was hers. That evening, Marcus came home from school to find Claire in the garage standing in front of the fire truck with a clipboard, making notes. "Aunt Claire," he said, his eyes going wide, "what is that?" "That," Claire said, a small smile playing at her lips, "is either our salvation or the dumbest thing I've ever done. Maybe both." Marcus walked around the truck, his young face filled with wonder, despite the vehicle's condition. "Is it a real fire truck? Like from a real fire department?" "American LaFrance, 1930. It's nearly 100 years old." "Are you going to restore it?" Marcus asked, running his hand along the rust-pitted side panel, just as Claire had done earlier. "I'm going to try. If I can pull this off, if I can bring this old girl back to life, we might be able to sell it for enough money to really change things for us." Marcus looked at her, his expression serious beyond his years. "Is this because of college?" he asked quietly. Claire walked over and put her arm around his shoulders. "It's because of a lot of things. Your future, your grandmother's care, keeping this garage running, but mostly it's because I looked at this truck and saw possibility. Your grandfather taught me to see past the rust and the damage to what something could be, and I think this could be something special." What Claire didn't say, what she kept to herself as they stood there in the cooling evening air, was the gnawing doubt already settling in her chest. She'd just spent a significant chunk of her emergency fund on a vehicle that might never run again. She'd committed herself to a project that would consume her time, her resources, and her energy, all while still trying to keep her regular business afloat. But the die was cast. The fire truck was here, and Claire Donovan had never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Word spread quickly in a small town like Harrisville. By the following Monday, it seemed like everyone knew about Claire's latest acquisition, and everyone had an opinion. Claire was replacing spark plugs on a Chevy Tahoe when Denise Parker walked into the garage, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete floor. Denise worked at the county clerk's office, always dressed professionally, always perfectly put together. She looked out of place among the grease and tools. "Claire, please tell me the rumors aren't true," Denise said, crossing her arms. Claire didn't look up from her work. "Depends on the rumor." "That you bought some ancient fire truck for $1,500? Denise's voice carried a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Money you don't have to spare?" "I had the money," Claire replied evenly, tightening the last spark plug. "And yes, I bought it." Denise walked over to the bay where the fire truck sat, barely visible under the tarp Claire had thrown over it. She lifted the corner, peered underneath, and let it drop with a shake of her head. "Claire, this is insane. You're barely keeping your head above water as it is. Your mother's care costs a fortune. Marcus needs—" "I know what Marcus needs," Claire interrupted, her voice sharp. "I know exactly what everyone needs. That's why I bought the truck." "To restore it?" Denise's eyebrows shot up. "Do you have any idea how much that's going to cost? The time it'll take? Claire, you're a good mechanic, but this isn't just replacing brake pads. This is a complete restoration of a vehicle from 1930. The parts alone can be fabricated or sourced from specialty suppliers. I've already started researching." Denise sighed heavily. "And while you're pouring every spare minute and dollar into this project, How are you going to keep your actual business running, the business that pays your bills? It was a valid question, one Claire had asked herself repeatedly over the weekend. I'll manage. I always do. That's not a plan, that's hope, Denise said softly. Look, I love you, and I know you're trying to help your family, but this feels like desperation, not strategy. Have you thought about what happens if this doesn't work out? If you can't restore it? Or if you do and nobody wants to buy it? Claire felt her jaw tighten. Then I'll have tried. That's more than doing nothing. Denise left shortly after, clearly frustrated, and she wasn't the last visitor that week. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store down the street, stopped by on Tuesday. He'd heard about the fire truck from his wife, who'd heard it from someone at the post office. Claire, I'm just going to say this as a friend, Tom began, leaning against a workbench. That fire truck is a money pit. My cousin tried restoring a 1940s fire engine about 10 years ago, spent $20,000 and 3 years on it. Know what he got when he finally sold it? $12,000. Lost $8,000 and 3 years of his life. Maybe he didn't do it right, Claire suggested, though doubt was already creeping into her voice. Tom shrugged. Maybe, or maybe the market just isn't there. These things are novelties, Claire. Most people who want them can't afford them, and most people who can afford them don't want them. You're chasing a very small buyer pool. Even Marcus, despite his initial enthusiasm, started expressing concerns. One evening, while they were eating dinner, takeout Chinese because Claire was too exhausted to cook, he brought it up. Aunt Claire, kids at school are saying you made a bad investment, Marcus said quietly, pushing lo mein around his plate. Claire set down her fork. What do you think? Marcus was silent for a moment. I think you're the smartest person I know, but I also think you're doing this for me, for college, and I don't want you to lose money because of me. The guilt in his voice broke her heart. Marcus, listen to me. I'm doing this for us, all of us. Your grandmother, you, the garage, our future. But I'm also doing it because I believe I can. Your grandfather used to say that every machine has a story, and if you're patient enough, skilled enough, you can bring that story back to life. But what if you can't? Marcus asked, meeting her eyes. It was the question everyone was asking, the question Claire asked herself every night. Then I'll have tried, and that matters. But the doubts kept coming. At the Riverside Diner, where Claire grabbed coffee most mornings, she overheard conversations about her foolish purchase. At the auto parts store 2 towns over, the clerk made a comment about that crazy lady trying to restore the old fire truck. Even her mother, in one of her rare lucid moments during a Sunday visit, had looked at Claire with confusion. Why would you waste money on something like that, honey? Patricia had asked, her weathered hand gripping Claire's. Your father always said to invest in sure things. The worst came from Robert Chen, the bank manager who handled the loan on her garage. He called her in for a meeting on Friday afternoon, and Claire knew it wasn't good news before she even sat down. Claire, I've been looking at your accounts, Robert said, his expression sympathetic but firm. Your business income is down 18% this quarter compared to last year. Your personal account has taken a significant hit with this fire truck purchase, and your credit cards are approaching their limits. I'm aware of my financial situation, Robert.
Are you? He leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you just made your situation considerably worse. That $1,500 could have gone toward your mother's care or been kept as emergency funds. Instead, you've invested it in a vehicle that's going to require thousands more to restore, with no guarantee of return. It's an investment, Claire began. It's a gamble, Robert interrupted. And Claire, with all due respect, you're not in a position to gamble. If your business income continues to decline, you're going to have trouble making your loan payments. And if you're pouring resources into this restoration project instead of into keeping your business healthy, he trailed off. letting the implication hang in the air. Claire left the bank feeling like she'd been punched in the stomach. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe she was being foolish, reckless, driven by desperation rather than sound judgment. That evening, she stood alone in the garage after closing, staring at the tarp-covered fire truck. She walked over slowly and pulled the tarp off completely, letting it fall to the floor. In the harsh fluorescent lights, the vehicle looked even worse than she remembered. The rust seemed deeper, the damage more extensive, the task more impossible. She climbed up into the driver's seat. The old leather cracked and brittle beneath her. The steering wheel was enormous, the dashboard a maze of ancient gauges and controls. She gripped the wheel, closed her eyes, and for just a moment, let herself imagine what this truck had been, the fires it had fought, the lives it had saved, the firefighters who'd ridden it into danger. This wasn't just a machine. It was a piece of history, a testament to craftsmanship and purpose. And yes, everyone said she'd made a mistake. Everyone said she was throwing her money away. Everyone said it was impossible. But Claire had never let impossible stop her before. She climbed down from the cab, walked to her workbench, and pulled out a fresh notebook. She opened it to the first page and wrote at the top, 1930 American La France, Type 145, Restoration Project. Then she began to make a list. Not a list of why she couldn't do it, or what everyone said, or how much it would cost. A list of what needed to be done. Step by step, system by system, from the engine to the chassis, from the pump to the paint. It would be the biggest project of her life. It would test every skill she had. It might fail spectacularly, but she was going to try anyway. The next morning, Saturday, Claire arrived at the garage before dawn. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with plans and calculations. She made coffee in the small break room, strong and black, and carried it out to where the fire truck waited. Marcus showed up an hour later, as she'd asked him to. He looked surprised to see her already elbow-deep in the engine compartment. "You're really doing this," he said. It wasn't a question. "We're really doing this," Claire corrected, gesturing for him to come closer. "You wanted to learn about engines, about restoration, about mechanical engineering. Well, here's your chance. This is going to be our project. Together." Marcus's face lit up despite his earlier concerns. "Where do we start?" Claire smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. "We start by taking everything apart. We need to see exactly what we're dealing with. Every bolt, every wire, every component. We document it all, photograph it all, and then we assess what can be saved and what needs to be replaced." They worked through the morning, carefully removing parts, laying them out on tarps, taking photographs, making notes. The engine was seized, as expected. The transmission was full of old, congealed fluid. The brake system was completely shot. The wiring was a rat's nest of deteriorated insulation and corroded connections. It was overwhelming. It was daunting. It was exactly the kind of challenge Claire had been craving without even knowing it. By noon, they'd removed the engine from the chassis, a task that required creative use of a chain hoist and several prayers that the ancient mounting bolts wouldn't snap. The engine sat on a wheeled stand, a hulking mass of cast iron and rust, waiting for its rebirth. Claire stood back, hands on her hips, studying it. This was the heart of the machine. If she could bring this engine back to life, everything else would follow. "It's going to take months," Marcus observed, echoing her thoughts. "Probably a year, maybe more. It's going to be hard. It's going to be frustrating. There will be setbacks and failures. But Marcus, when we're done, when this truck runs again, it'll be because we didn't give up, because we saw past what everyone else saw." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the deeper lesson. "Aunt Claire, Thank you for trying. Thank you for believing in me, even when I don't quite believe in myself." They stood there together, aunt and nephew, staring at the disassembled remains of a 1930 fire truck, surrounded by doubt and debt and 100 good reasons to quit. But they didn't quit. They got back to work. Because sometimes, the only way to prove everyone wrong is to keep going when every logical voice says stop. Sometimes, you have to trust that the impossible is just difficult that nobody else had the courage to attempt. Claire didn't know it yet, but she was about to prove them all wrong in ways she couldn't possibly imagine.
Winter arrived early that year in Harrisville, bringing with it bitter winds that found every crack in the garage walls. Claire invested in 2 space heaters that ran constantly, driving up her electric bill but making the work bearable. The restoration had officially begun, and with it came a harsh education in just how difficult the project would truly be. The engine rebuild alone proved to be a nightmare. The 6-cylinder Continental engine had been exposed to the elements for decades. Water had seeped into the cylinders, causing extensive corrosion. Claire spent 2 weeks just trying to free the pistons, using penetrating oil and patience, tapping gently with a brass hammer, refusing to force anything that might crack or break. "This is archaeology as much as mechanics," she explained to Marcus one evening as they worked by the light of portable work lamps. "We're not just fixing this, we're uncovering it, layer by layer." Marcus had become her constant companion in the garage. After school, he'd drop his backpack just inside the door and head straight for wherever Claire was working. His young hands proved invaluable for reaching into tight spaces, and his engineering mind grasped concepts quickly. Together, they studied old service manuals Claire had tracked down through online forums and specialty dealers, each manual costing money she could barely spare. The parts situation was worse than she'd anticipated. Modern auto parts stores were useless for a vehicle this old. Claire had to hunt through salvage yards, online auctions, and specialty suppliers who catered to antique vehicle enthusiasts. A set of piston rings cost $300. Gaskets had to be custom-made from materials Claire ordered online, then hand-cut using patterns she created herself. Every component seemed to require twice the time and 3 times the money she'd budgeted. Her regular business suffered. Claire tried to balance restoration work with paying customers, but there were only so many hours in a day. She found herself working 16, 17-hour stretches, fueled by coffee and determination. She'd handle a brake job for Mrs. Henderson's sedan, then immediately dive back into fabricating a new fuel line for the fire truck. She'd diagnose an electrical problem in someone's pickup, then spend the rest of the night rewiring the ancient fire truck's lighting system. The financial strain intensified. Her credit cards crept higher. She started buying generic groceries, cutting corners wherever she could. She stopped going to the diner for coffee, brewing her own instead. She wore the same worn work clothes day after day because buying new ones wasn't an option. Her visits to see her mother became shorter, squeezed between work commitments. Patricia had good days and bad days, but the bad days were becoming more frequent. On one visit in early December, her mother didn't recognize her at all, calling her by her sister's name, asking about people who'd been dead for years. Claire sat there holding her mother's hand, fighting back tears, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake with the fire truck when she should be spending this precious time with her mother instead. The town's attitude didn't improve. If anything, the mockery intensified as weeks turned into months, and the fire truck remained a disassembled collection of parts spread across her garage. Pete Sullivan, who owned the gas station on Main Street, made it a point to ask about the fire truck every time Claire came in to fill up. "How's that money pit coming along?" he'd say with a smirk. "Heard you're about 15 grand into it now. That true?" Claire would force a smile and say something non-committal, but inside she was screaming. Because Pete wasn't entirely wrong. Between parts, materials, and specialized tools she'd had to purchase, she was now over $12,000 into the project. Add that to the initial purchase price, and she was nearly $14,000 in the hole on a vehicle that still couldn't drive, couldn't pump water, and couldn't do anything except sit in her garage taking up space.
The local coffee shop became a place she avoided. She'd overheard a conversation there in January that had cut deep. Two men she knew casually, both business owners in town, were discussing her situation. "That Donovan woman is going to lose everything," one said. "Mark my words, that garage will be foreclosed on by summer. She's pouring every cent into a fantasy while her real business circles the drain." "Shame, really," the other replied. "Her dad built that place up nice. She's running it into the ground, chasing a pipe dream." Claire left without ordering, her hands shaking with anger and humiliation. But more than anger, she felt fear, because they might be right. Her accountant, a stern woman named Margaret Foster, who'd handled the garage's books for years, laid it out plainly during their quarterly meeting in February. "Claire, your business revenue is down 32% compared to last year. Your personal debt has increased by $18,000. Your operating costs are up because of increased utility usage. At this rate, you'll be in serious financial trouble by mid-year." "The fire truck will sell," Claire insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Margaret removed her glasses and looked at Claire with something approaching pity. "Will it? Have you found a buyer? Have you even started looking? Because from what I can see, you're still months away from completion, and you have no concrete plan for sale." Claire had no answer for that. She'd been so focused on the work itself, on solving each problem as it arose, that she hadn't thought much beyond getting the truck running. Finding a buyer, negotiating a sale, actually getting her money back, those seemed like distant concerns compared to the immediate challenge of making a 95-year-old engine fire again.
February brought another crisis. The garage's main hydraulic lift failed catastrophically while Claire had a customer's SUV raised. Thankfully, no one was hurt and the vehicle wasn't damaged, but the lift was beyond repair. A new lift cost $8,000, money Claire absolutely did not have. She sat in her small office that night, head in her hands, surrounded by bills and past due notices. The heating bill was overdue, so was the electric bill. Marcus needed new shoes. His current ones had holes in the soles he'd tried to hide from her. Her mother's care facility had sent a notice that rates were increasing next month. And now she needed a new lift just to keep her business operational. The smart thing, the logical thing, would be to abandon the fire truck project. Sell off the parts she'd already bought, take whatever loss she had to take, and focus on saving her business. That's what everyone had been telling her to do for months. Claire pulled out her notebook, the one where she'd been documenting every step of the restoration. She flipped through pages of notes, sketches, photographs. She saw the progress she'd made. The engine, painstakingly rebuilt, now sitting complete and ready for installation. The chassis cleaned and repaired, sandblasted down to bare metal. The cab where she'd hand-stitched new leather for the seats using techniques she'd taught herself from YouTube videos. The brass fittings polished until they gleamed like gold. She thought about Marcus, how engaged he'd become with the project, how his grades had actually improved because he was applying what he learned in math and science classes to real-world problems in the garage, how he'd stopped being the angry, withdrawn kid he'd been after his mother disappeared and had become excited about engineering, about building, about creating. She thought about her father, about what he would say. She could almost hear his voice. "Finish what you start, Claire Bear. Don't matter how hard it gets. You see it through." The next morning, Claire made a decision. She called the manufacturer about the hydraulic lift and negotiated a used model for $4,500, financing it over 2 years at an interest rate that made her wince. It would mean higher monthly payments, more debt, more pressure, but it would keep her business running while she finished the fire truck. She also did something she'd been avoiding out of pride. She asked for help. She reached out to the online communities of antique vehicle enthusiasts she'd been learning from. She posted detailed photographs and descriptions of her project, explaining her situation honestly. Within days, people from across the country were offering advice, sharing resources, even sending parts they had lying around that she could use. An elderly man in Oregon mailed her a complete set of original fire truck decals,
refusing payment, saying he was just happy to see someone keeping history alive. A woman in Texas who'd restored a similar vehicle sent detailed notes on the paint process, saving Claire weeks of trial and error. A collector in Pennsylvania sold her a reproduction bell for the truck at cost, half what she'd have paid elsewhere. The online community support reminded her why she'd started this project. It wasn't just about money, though she desperately needed that. It was about preservation, about refusing to let something with value be discarded just because it was old and broken. Marcus noticed the change in her attitude. "You seem different this week," he observed one Saturday as they worked on fitting the rebuilt engine back into the chassis. "I remembered something," Claire said, carefully guiding the engine into position while Marcus worked the chain hoist. "Your grandfather used to say that the hardest work is the work worth doing. Easy things don't change anything. Easy things don't matter." "Is this the hardest thing you've ever done?" Marcus asked. Claire thought about it. Yes, but it might also be the most important. By March, the fire truck was starting to look like a fire truck again. The engine was installed, the transmission was rebuilt and mounted, the drive shaft was connected. The brake system was completely new, modern components adapted to work with the vintage chassis. The electrical system was functional, though Claire had spent countless hours tracing wires and soldering connections. The painting process began in April. Claire had researched the original color scheme used by fire departments in the 1930s. Deep red for the body, black for the chassis and wheels, gold leaf for the lettering. She couldn't afford professional paint work, so she did it herself in a makeshift paint booth she constructed in the garage using plastic sheeting and ventilation fans. It took 3 weeks and 5 coats to get the red right. Each layer had to be sanded smooth, each imperfection corrected. Her hands developed blisters from the sanding work. Her back ached from bending over the vehicle for hours. But slowly, beautifully, the fire truck transformed. When she finally rolled it outside on a warm afternoon in late April to see it in natural light, Claire felt tears streaming down her face. It was stunning. The deep red paint gleamed in the sunshine. The brass fittings sparkled. The chrome she'd painstakingly replated caught the light. The gold lettering she'd carefully applied by hand spelled out Harrisville Fire Department on the doors. Marcus stood beside her, his mouth hanging open. "Aunt Claire," he whispered, "it's beautiful." "It's not done yet, but it's getting there," Claire said, wiping her eyes. The pump system still needed work. The hoses needed to be replaced. The truck needed to be tested, driven, put through its paces to ensure everything worked correctly. But for the first time in 7 months, Claire looked at the fire truck and saw not an impossible challenge, but a nearly completed triumph. She'd spent over $16,000. She'd worked over 1,000 hours. She'd sacrificed sleep, social life, and financial security. Everyone said she was crazy. Everyone said she'd fail. But the fire truck gleaming in her driveway said otherwise. May arrived with unusually warm weather, and with it came the moment Claire had been working toward for 8 months. The fire truck was mechanically complete. Every system had been rebuilt, tested, and retested. The engine had been turned over by hand dozens of times to ensure smooth rotation. The fuel system had been flushed and filled with fresh gasoline. The ignition system had been meticulously checked. Now came the moment of truth. Claire stood in front of the fire truck on a Saturday morning, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus was beside her, along with 3 members of the online restoration community who'd driven in specifically for this moment. They'd become friends through months of correspondence, offering advice and encouragement when Claire needed it most. There was Daniel Ortega from Pennsylvania, a retired fire chief who'd restored 2 antique fire trucks himself. Rita Kowalski from Michigan, a mechanical engineer who specialized in vintage vehicles. And James Wheeler from Indiana, a collector who'd offered to help Claire find a buyer once the truck was complete. "You're ready?" Daniel asked, his weathered face creased with a smile. Claire took a deep breath.
I've been ready for 8 months. She climbed into the driver's seat, feeling the new leather beneath her. The steering wheel was smooth under her palms, the dash instruments all restored and functional. She'd memorized the starting procedure from the original manual. Choke out, throttle slightly open, ignition switch to on. Her hand moved to the starter button. This was it. 8 months of work, $16,000, countless hours of doubt and determination. Everything came down to this moment. She pressed the button. The starter motor engaged with a grinding whir. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times. It coughed, sputtered, and for a heart-stopping moment, Claire thought it would die. Then, with a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to shake the very air, the engine caught and roared to life. The sound was magnificent. 6 cylinders firing in perfect harmony, the exhaust note deep and powerful. Claire felt the vibration through the steering wheel, through the floorboards, through her entire body. The engine that had been seized and dead for decades was alive again, running smooth and strong. Marcus let out a whoop of joy. The others applauded, their faces reflecting the same amazement Claire felt. She sat there, hands on the wheel, tears streaming down her face as the engine idled. She adjusted the throttle, bringing the RPMs up, listening to the beautiful mechanical symphony she'd orchestrated. "She runs!" Rita shouted over the engine noise. "Claire, she actually runs!" Claire let the engine warm up for several minutes, watching the temperature gauge, monitoring the oil pressure, checking for any leaks or problems. Everything looked perfect. She slowly pressed the clutch, engaged first gear, and eased off the brake. The fire truck rolled forward. It was only a few feet, just moving it out of the garage bay and into the parking lot. But those few feet represented a triumph beyond anything Claire had imagined. The brakes worked when she pressed the pedal, the steering responded smoothly, the transmission shifted cleanly into second gear. She drove the fire truck in a slow circle around her parking lot, the engine purring, the mechanical systems working exactly as they should. When she finally brought it to a stop and shut off the engine, the silence that followed felt sacred. Claire climbed down from the cab on shaking legs. Marcus ran over and hugged her fiercely, and she held him tight, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "You did it," Marcus said. "Everyone said you couldn't, but you did it." Daniel walked around the truck, examining it with a professional eye. "Claire, this is exceptional work. The attention to detail, the quality of the restoration, this is museum grade." "What do you think it's worth?" Claire asked, the practical question cutting through her emotional high. James, the collector, had been quietly inspecting every aspect of the truck. Now he straightened up, his expression thoughtful. "In this condition, fully functional, with documentation of the restoration, I'd say 60 to 70,000, maybe more to the right buyer." Claire's knees nearly buckled. $70,000. After spending roughly $16,000, that would be a profit of over $50,000, enough to pay off her debts, secure Marcus's college fund, ensure her mother's care for years, and keep the garage running. "I might know someone," James continued. "There's a private collector in Vermont who specializes in 1930s fire apparatus. He's been looking for a LaFrance in good condition. Would you like me to reach out?" Claire nodded, unable to speak. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire put the finishing touches on the fire truck. The pump system was the final major hurdle. The original pump was too far gone to restore, but she'd sourced a period-correct replacement from a salvage yard in California. Installing it required fabricating custom mounting brackets and adapting the drive system, but with Marcus's help and guidance from her online friends, she managed it. The first time they tested the pump, connecting hoses to the outlets and engaging the system, water sprayed 50 feet into the air in a perfect arc. The pressure gauge held steady. The pump operated smoothly, just as it had been designed to nearly a century ago. The fire truck was complete, fully functional, ready to be sold. James arranged for his collector friend, a man named Vincent Ashford, to visit the following Saturday. Claire spent the week cleaning every inch of the truck, polishing the brass,
touching up tiny paint imperfections, making sure everything was absolutely perfect. Saturday arrived cool and clear. Vincent Ashford drove up in a luxury SUV just after 10 in the morning. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, wearing expensive, casual clothes and an expression of eager anticipation. Claire gave him a complete tour, explaining every aspect of the restoration. She showed him the documentation she'd meticulously kept, photographs of every stage, receipts for every part, notes on every challenge overcome. She demonstrated the engine, the transmission, the pump system. She let him sit in the driver's seat, feel the controls, experience the vehicle firsthand. Vincent's enthusiasm grew with each passing minute. "This is extraordinary work," he said, running his hand along the restored dashboard. "The craftsmanship, the authenticity. Claire, you've created something truly special here." "Thank you," Claire said, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment that would determine whether the last 8 months had been brilliant or disastrous. Vincent walked around the truck one more time, taking in every detail. Then he turned to Claire with a smile. "I'll give you $65,000 for it. Cash. I can have the money transferred to your account by Monday." $65,000. Claire's mind raced through the calculations. After paying off what she owed on credit cards, the loan for the hydraulic lift, and setting aside money for taxes, she'd walk away with close to $45,000 clear. It was more money than she'd seen in years. Life-changing money. "That's a generous offer," Claire heard herself say. "Can I have the weekend to think about it?" Vincent looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course. I'll be in town through Monday. Here's my card. Call me when you've decided." After Vincent left, Marcus turned to Claire with confusion written all over his face. "Aunt Claire, why did you say you needed to think about it? That's exactly what we've been working for." Claire looked at the fire truck, gleaming in the afternoon sun. "I know. I need a day. That's all." That evening, Claire drove to the nursing home to visit her mother. Patricia was having one of her better days, recognizing Claire immediately and asking about the garage. "I finished the fire truck, Mom. It runs perfectly. I have a buyer willing to pay $65,000 for it." Patricia's eyes, though clouded with age and illness, sharpened with interest. "That's wonderful, honey. Your father would be so proud." "Would he? I went into debt for this. I risked the garage. I risked everything we have." Patricia squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Your father always said that anything worth having requires risk. You took that risk. You did the work. And now you're reaping the reward. That's how it's supposed to work." "But everyone said I was foolish," Claire said softly. "Everyone is always saying something," Patricia replied, a flash of her old spirit showing through. "Your father faced the same doubts when he started the garage. People said he'd fail. But he didn't listen to them. He listened to himself, just like you did." Claire sat with her mother for another hour, talking about the restoration, about Marcus, about the future. When she left, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. On Sunday morning, Claire took Marcus to breakfast at the Riverside Diner, something they hadn't done in nearly a year because of the cost. They ordered pancakes and bacon, and Claire let Marcus get the chocolate milk he loved. "Are you going to sell the truck?" Marcus asked between bites. Claire cut her pancakes slowly, thinking. That was always the plan. "But," Marcus prompted, sensing her hesitation, "but I'm realizing that maybe the point wasn't just the money. Maybe it was proving that I could do it. Proving that impossible is just another word for difficult." Marcus nodded slowly. "You know what I learned from this? I learned that everyone's going to tell you that you can't do something, but if you believe in yourself and you're willing to work hard enough, you can prove them all wrong." Claire smiled at her nephew, seeing the change in him over the past 8 months. He'd grown more confident, more focused. He'd found his passion. He'd learned lessons no classroom could teach. You also learned practical engineering, welding, electrical systems, and mechanical restoration, Claire added. Yeah, that too. On Monday morning, Claire called Vincent Ashford. I've made my decision, she said. I'll accept your offer. Excellent! Vincent's enthusiasm was palpable. I'll have my transport company pick it up on Wednesday. The money will be in your account by end of business today. Claire hung up the phone and sat in her small office staring at the phone. She'd done it. Against all odds, against all advice, against everyone's expectations. She'd completed the restoration and found a buyer. The fire truck that everyone called a money pit had just earned her the biggest payday of her life. She walked out into the garage where the fire truck sat in all its restored glory. Marcus was already there, running his hand along the polished red paint. It's really happening, he said. It's really happening, Claire confirmed. What neither of them knew was that the fire truck's most important moment was still to come, that in less than 2 months, this restored piece of history would prove its worth in a way no one could have predicted, that Claire's decision to save this vehicle would end up saving something far more precious than money. But for now, in this moment, Claire Donovan allowed herself to simply enjoy her victory. She'd bet everything on herself, and she'd won. The money hit Claire's account on Monday afternoon, exactly as promised, $65,000. She sat at her desk, staring at the balance on her computer screen, hardly believing it was real. After years of scraping by, of robbing Peter to pay Paul, of watching numbers dwindle rather than grow, seeing that balance felt surreal. The first thing she did was pay off every credit card. Gone. The second was to pay down the hydraulic lift loan to a manageable level. The third was to set up a dedicated college fund for Marcus, depositing $15,000 that would grow with interest over the next 2 years before he needed it. Fourth, she paid 6 months ahead on her mother's nursing home care, giving herself breathing room she hadn't had in years. When the financial dust settled, Claire still had $22,000 in her account. Real savings. A genuine emergency fund. The kind of financial cushion that let her sleep through the night without waking at 3 in the morning in a panic about bills. She took Marcus out to dinner that Monday night, to an actual restaurant with tablecloths and a menu that didn't have prices ending in 99 cents. They ordered steaks and dessert, and Claire tipped 30% because she could, because for the first time in years, she wasn't calculating every dollar. How does it feel? Marcus asked, watching her with a smile. Terrifying, Claire admitted. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for it to be a mistake. It's not a mistake, Marcus said firmly. You earned this, every penny of it. The transport company was scheduled to pick up the fire truck on Wednesday morning. Claire spent Tuesday giving it one final cleaning, polishing the brass fittings one last time, making sure every detail was perfect for its new owner. Vincent had been thrilled with the purchase, already making plans to display it at vintage vehicle shows across the Northeast. Tuesday evening, as Claire was locking up the garage, her phone rang. It was Vincent Ashford. Claire, I'm terribly sorry, but I need to ask for a delay, Vincent said, his voice apologetic. My transport company had a major accident this afternoon. One of their trucks was hit by a drunk driver on the interstate. The driver's going to be fine, but they've lost 2 of their specialized transporters. They're completely backed up. How long of a delay are we talking about? Claire husked, feeling a small knot of concern forming in her stomach. 2 weeks, maybe 3? I know this is inconvenient, and I completely understand if you want to back out of the deal. I'll understand if you found another buyer. Claire looked at the fire truck sitting in her garage bay, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. No, it's fine. The truck isn't going anywhere. We can wait. Thank you for being so understanding, Vincent said, relief evident in his voice. I'll keep you updated on the transport situation. The truck is already paid for, so it's technically mine, but I hate having it sit there when you need your garage space. It's not a problem, Claire assured him, though privately she was eager to have the bay cleared so she could get back to focusing solely on her regular business. After hanging up, Claire walked over to the fire truck and ran her hand along the hood. "Looks like you're staying a little longer, old girl," she said quietly. The delay turned out to be longer than expected. Vincent called again the following week to explain that the transport company was dealing with insurance issues and regulatory investigations following the accident. The new timeline was 4 to 6 weeks, then 5 to 7 weeks, then indefinitely pending resolution of the legal complications. By late June, the fire truck was still sitting in Claire's garage, fully restored and paid for, but going nowhere. Vincent was apologetic and frustrated, offering to arrange alternative transport, but the specialized equipment haulers were all booked months in advance. The truck was too valuable and too delicate to risk with a standard towing service. "These things happen," she told him, during one of their weekly calls. "The truck is safe here. We'll get it to you eventually." In truth, she'd become somewhat fond of having it around. Customers would come in for routine work and end up asking about the beautiful antique fire truck in the corner bay. It was a conversation starter, a point of pride. Claire found herself telling the story of the restoration over and over, and seeing people's reactions shift from skepticism to admiration never got old. The summer of 2025 arrived with unusual ferocity. June was hot. July was hotter. By early August, Harrisville and the surrounding Millbrook County were experiencing temperatures that broke records set decades earlier. Day after day, the thermometer climbed past 95 degrees. The grass in yards turned brown and brittle. The creek that ran through town, usually flowing strong even in summer, dwindled to a trickle. The reservoir that supplied Harrisville and 3 neighboring towns dropped to levels not seen since the 1950s. With the heat came fire warnings. The countryside surrounding Harrisville was heavily forested, beautiful rolling hills covered in oak and pine. But now those forests were tinderboxes. The fallen leaves from previous seasons, normally damp and slowly decomposing, were bone dry. Dead branches that would typically rot away had instead dried out to perfect kindling. The living trees themselves were stressed by the drought, their sap running low, their branches brittle. The county fire marshal issued a burn ban: no campfires, no outdoor burning of any kind. Fire danger ratings climbed from moderate to high to very high to extreme. The volunteer fire department in Harrisville, like many rural departments, was understaffed and under-equipped. They had 2 modern pumper trucks and about 15 active volunteers, spread thin across a coverage area of nearly 50 square miles. Claire paid attention to the warnings like everyone else, but she wasn't particularly worried. Harrisville was a town, not wilderness. Yes, there were forests nearby, but there were also roads, fire breaks, and emergency services. Surely if anything happened, it would be manageable. She focused instead on rebuilding her business. With financial pressure reduced, she could take time to do things right rather than fast. She invested in some new diagnostic equipment. She hired a part-time mechanic, a young woman named Amy Richardson who just graduated from technical school and was hungry to learn. Claire found herself enjoying the work again, not just surviving, but actually taking pleasure in solving mechanical puzzles. Marcus spent his summer working in the garage, earning money for college, while continuing to learn. He'd been accepted to 3 universities with strong engineering programs. With the money Claire had set aside, combined with some scholarships Marcus had earned, college was no longer a desperate dream, but a realistic plan. Life, for the first time in years, felt stable, manageable, good. On August 14th, a Wednesday, the temperature hit 102 degrees by noon. The air felt thick and heavy, hard to breathe. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, just endless brutal blue and a sun that felt like it was pressing down on the earth. The heat shimmered off the pavement in waves. Claire closed the garage early at 4 o'clock, something she rarely did. It was simply too hot to work. The space heaters she'd used in winter were long gone, replaced by industrial fans, but even those just pushed hot air around. She sent Amy home, told Marcus to stay inside with the air conditioning, and went to visit her mother. The nursing home was blessedly cool, the air conditioning running at full capacity. Patricia was having a difficult day, confused and agitated, not recognizing Claire at all. The nurses said the heat made many of the residents worse, disrupting their already fragile mental states. Claire sat with her mother anyway, holding her hand, talking softly, even though Patricia seemed to be listening to voices only she could hear. After an hour, a nurse gently suggested Claire should go home, get some rest. There was nothing more she could do today. Driving back through Harrisville in the early evening heat, Claire noticed how empty the streets were. People were staying inside, avoiding the oppressive temperature. The town felt deserted, almost post-apocalyptic in its emptiness. A few dogs lay panting in shaded yards. Nothing else moved. She stopped at the grocery store to pick up something easy for dinner, not wanting to heat up the kitchen by cooking. The air conditioning felt like heaven. She was in the frozen food aisle, debating between different options, when she heard someone talking urgently into their phone. "No, I'm serious. I saw smoke, lots of it, out past Miller's Ridge." Claire's attention sharpened. Miller's Ridge was about 8 miles outside town, where the forest was thickest. It was also where several large propane storage tanks were located, supplying fuel to rural homes that weren't connected to natural gas lines. She quickly paid for her groceries and headed home, turning on the local radio station. Nothing yet about a fire. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the person had been mistaken. But 20 minutes later, as Claire was putting groceries away in her kitchen, her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. "Wildfire reported near Miller's Ridge. Residents in affected areas advised to prepare for possible evacuation. Monitor local emergency broadcasts." Claire walked to her window and looked toward the east, toward Miller's Ridge. She couldn't see anything from here, too many buildings in the way. But somewhere out there, in the worst drought in decades, in temperatures over 100 degrees, and in forests that are essentially explosive waiting for a spark, something was burning. She thought about the volunteer fire department's 2 trucks. She thought about the enormous coverage area they were responsible for. She thought about the propane tanks out near Miller's Ridge, each one containing thousands of gallons of highly flammable fuel. And she thought about the restored 1930 fire truck sitting in her garage, fully functional, capable of pumping thousands of gallons of water, waiting for a transport that might not come for weeks. Claire grabbed her keys and headed for the garage. She had a feeling she was going to need to make a phone call. Several phone calls, actually. The fire had started, and though nobody knew it yet, it was about to become the worst disaster Millbrook County had seen in over 50 years. Claire burst into the garage and immediately called the Harrisville Volunteer Fire Department. The line rang 6 times before someone picked up, breathing hard. "Harrisville, this is Deputy Chief Morrison." "Jack, it's Claire Donovan," she said quickly. Morrison had been a customer of hers for years, his personal truck serviced regularly at her garage. "I just saw the alert about Miller's Ridge. How bad is it?" "Bad and getting worse," Jack said, his voice tight with stress. "Started from a downed power line near the old Patterson property. Wind picked up about an hour ago, pushing it south toward the residential areas. We've got both our trucks out there now, but Claire, this thing is moving fast, real fast." "What about mutual aid, county resources?"
Called everyone within 50 miles. They're all dealing with their own fires. This drought has the whole region on fire. Nearest available unit is 3 hours out, and by then... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Claire took a breath. "Jack, I have a functional fire truck here. The 1930 LaFrance I restored. It runs, the pump works, it can carry 500 gallons of water." There was a pause. "Claire, that's an antique. It's not certified for..." "I know it's not certified for modern firefighting, but it works. And right now, doesn't something working beat nothing at all?" Another pause, longer this time. Claire could hear radio chatter in the background, urgent voices, the sound of sirens. "How fast can you get it out here?" Jack finally asked. 20 minutes, maybe 15. "Do it. Head to the staging area at the Miller's Ridge Community Center. We'll figure out how to use you when you get here." He hung up without saying goodbye. Claire immediately called Marcus. "I need you at the garage right now. Emergency." "What's happening?" Marcus asked, alert despite having been relaxing at home. "We're taking the fire truck to Miller's Ridge. There's a wildfire and they need every resource they can get." Marcus arrived within 5 minutes, running through the door breathless. Claire was already filling the fire truck's water tank, using the garage's water supply, the tank slowly filling with 500 gallons of precious water.
Is this legal? Marcus asked as he watched her work. I have no idea, but Jack Morrison asked for it and people's homes are burning. We'll worry about legal later. She'd already loaded essential equipment into the truck. Extra hoses, tools, flashlights, work gloves. The tank finished filling just as Amy Richardson, her part-time mechanic, came running into the garage. I heard on the scanner, you're really taking it out there? Yes, Claire said firmly. Amy, I need you to stay here and monitor the radio. If anyone calls looking for me, tell them where I am. Claire, let me come with you. I know basic firefighting from my dad. I can help. Claire hesitated, then nodded. Having an extra pair of hands could be crucial. Get in. The three of them climbed into the 1930 fire truck, Claire driving, Marcus in the middle, Amy on the passenger side. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life with that beautiful mechanical sound she'd worked so hard to achieve. She engaged the clutch, shifted into gear, and the fire truck rolled out of the garage into the sweltering evening heat. Driving the antique fire truck through town was surreal. The sun was setting, casting everything in an orange glow that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now it just looked ominous. People came out of their houses as the distinctive sound of the old engine echoed down the streets, watching in amazement as Claire drove past. She could see the smoke now, a massive column rising into the sky to the east, dark and threatening. As they left the town limits and headed toward Miller's Ridge on the rural highway, the smoke grew thicker. The smell hit them through the open windows. Burning wood, burning grass, chemicals from burning structures. The staging area at the Miller's Ridge Community Center was controlled chaos. 2 modern fire trucks were parked near the building, firefighters in full gear running between them. Several police vehicles had their lights flashing. Civilians were helping to evacuate residents, loading elderly people and children into cars. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Claire pulled the antique fire truck into the parking lot, and every head turned. Jack Morrison jogged over, his face covered in soot, his eyes red from smoke exposure. You actually brought it, he said, looking at the gleaming red truck with something between disbelief and hope. I said I would, Claire replied, climbing down from the cab. What do you need? Jack pulled out a map, spreading it on the hood of a police car. The fire is here, he pointed to a section east of their position. It's crowned, jumping from treetop to treetop. We can't stop the main body of it with what we have. What we're trying to do is create a defensive perimeter around the residential areas and protect the propane storage facility here. He pointed to another spot on the map. If those tanks go, Jack continued, we're looking at an explosion that'll make everything worse. But we're spread too thin. I've got one truck trying to keep the fire from jumping Route 17 and another protecting the north side of the housing development. I need someone to keep the storage facility wet, spray down the vegetation around it, cool the tanks themselves if the fire gets close. I can do that, Claire said immediately. Jack looked at her seriously. Claire, this isn't a game. The fire could shift direction. You could end up in real danger. Then tell me what to do to stay safe, Claire said. But I'm doing this, Jack. That truck was built to fight fires. Let it do its job. Jack nodded slowly. Okay. Follow Deputy Thompson. He'll lead you to the storage facility. There's a pond about 200 yards from the tanks. You can draft water from there to refill. Keep everything around those tanks wet. If the fire gets within a quarter mile of your position, you get out. Understood? Understood, Claire confirmed. Marcus and Amy stood beside her, their faces set with determination. Jack looked at them, then back at Claire. You sure about this? Completely, Claire said.
They followed Deputy Thompson's police cruiser down a narrow access road, smoke swirling around them in thick clouds. The temperature seemed to increase with every mile, the heat from the approaching fire adding to the already brutal evening air. Through breaks in the smoke, Claire could see flames in the distance, a horrifying wall of orange and red consuming everything in its path. The propane storage facility came into view, 6 massive white cylindrical tanks, each one 30 feet tall, surrounded by a chain-link fence and very dry vegetation. The tanks represented the fuel source for hundreds of rural homes. If they exploded, the damage would be catastrophic, and the resulting fireball could spread the wildfire even further. Claire positioned the fire truck between the tanks and the direction of the approaching fire. She could see the flames now, maybe half a mile away, moving through the forest like a living thing. The roar was audible even from this distance, a sound like a massive waterfall combined with the howl of wind. "Marcus, help me get the hoses connected," Claire said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Amy, monitor the wind direction and the fire movement. If it shifts toward us suddenly, you tell me immediately." They worked quickly and efficiently, connecting hoses to the truck's pump, positioning them to spray the vegetation around the tanks. Claire engaged the pump and water began flowing, the antique equipment performing exactly as it was designed to do. She directed the spray across the dried grass and bushes, soaking everything, creating a wet barrier between the tanks and the approaching inferno. The fire grew closer. The smoke became so thick that Claire had to tie a wet cloth around her face to breathe. The heat was intense, like standing in front of an open oven. Embers began falling around them, glowing fragments that could start spot fires if they landed on something dry. Marcus and Amy used smaller hoses to extinguish embers as they landed, stamping out small fires before they could grow. Claire kept the main spray focused on the vegetation barrier and the tanks themselves, cooling them, keeping everything wet. The fire reached the tree line at the edge of the facility property. Claire watched in horror as flames climbed a massive oak tree, engulfing it in seconds. The tree became a tower of fire, and she could feel the radiant heat even from 200 yards away. "Claire, it's getting really close," Amy shouted over the roar. "Keep working," Claire shouted back. "We hold this line." The water tank was running low. Claire made the decision to refill from the pond Jack had mentioned. She drove the truck to the pond, backed it to the water's edge, and deployed the intake hose. The pump reversed, drawing water from the pond into the tank. It was a slower process than filling from a hydrant, but it worked. While the tank refilled, they could see another fire truck arriving on the far side of the storage facility. Help had finally come. But Claire's position was crucial. She was protecting the direct exposure where the fire was closest. For 3 hours they worked in the smoke and heat and chaos. Spray the vegetation, cool the tanks, extinguish embers, refill from the pond, repeat. Claire's arms ached from handling the heavy hoses. Her throat was raw from breathing smoke. Her eyes burned and watered constantly. But the 1930 fire truck kept running, the pump kept working, and the water kept flowing. Slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. More mutual aid units arrived from distant counties. Aircraft dropped fire retardant. The wind shifted, pushing the fire away from the residential areas. By midnight, the main body of the fire was contained, though it would smolder for days. Finally, Claire shut down the pump as the sun began to rise on Thursday morning. The propane tank stood intact, surrounded by blackened earth, but undamaged. The facility was saved. The residential area beyond it was saved. Because an antique fire truck that everyone had called a waste of money had used that very truck to help save her community from a disaster. Jack Morrison found Claire sitting on the running board of the fire truck, exhausted beyond words. Her face was black with soot, her clothes soaked with water and sweat, her hands shaking from fatigue and adrenaline. "You did it," Jack said simply. "That storage facility would have gone up without you here. Those tanks would have exploded and we'd have lost everything." Claire looked up at him, too tired to speak. Marcus and Amy sat nearby, equally exhausted, equally triumphant.
The local news crews arrived later that morning, filming the aftermath. The story spread quickly. The woman who'd restored an antique fire truck, who everyone said had wasted her money, had used that very truck to help save her community from a disaster. Vincent Ashford called that afternoon. "Claire, I've been following the news. What you did was extraordinary." "The truck did what it was built for," Claire said. "I want you to keep it. I'll consider my payment a donation to Harrisville. That truck belongs there, with you. It proved that yesterday." Within a week, the town council met and officially designated the 1930 LaFrance as a reserve apparatus for the Harrisville Fire Department. Claire was asked to maintain it, to keep it ready, to ensure that this piece of history could continue protecting her community. Marcus started college that fall with a full scholarship and a new understanding of what it meant to take risks for something you believed in. Patricia Donovan passed away peacefully in October, her final months made comfortable by care that Claire could afford because she'd taken a chance on a rusty old fire truck. Standing in her garage one evening in November, Claire looked at the fire truck, no longer pristine and perfect, but bearing the honorable scars of real service. The brass fittings had tarnished slightly from the heat and smoke. The paint showed marks where embers had landed. But it was beautiful in a way it hadn't been when it was freshly restored. This truck had been called worthless, a money pit, a foolish investment, but it had saved homes, protected lives, and proved that sometimes the things the world dismisses as useless turn out to be exactly what we need when it matters most. Claire had spent $16,000 and nearly a year of her life restoring this truck. She'd endured mockery, doubt, and near financial ruin. But on one hot August night, when her community needed it most, that investment had paid dividends no amount of money could measure. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't make sense on paper. Sometimes the value of something can't be calculated in dollars. Sometimes you just have to believe that what you're building, what you're restoring, what you're fighting for, has a purpose that goes beyond profit. The fire truck had taught her that lesson, and Claire Donovan would never forget it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.